All right, great. All right, at this time, I'd like to call to order the Tewksbury Finance Committee meeting for March 15th, 2021. Tonight, we have the school department budget review. So welcome, Mr. Libby, Mr. Malone. Mr. Libby, are you going to present something or?
Yeah, I
Okay.
will. I have a PowerPoint presentation if I'm allowed to share my screen.
Hopefully, hopefully you are.
Usually works.
Okay, I see it.
See it? Great.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right. Okay, so thanks for having us. This will be our sort of fourth public review of our budget. We've gone over this at 3 school committee hearings and workshops. So we're hopefully be able to answer any questions you have after the presentation.
Great.
We follow our district strategy as we make any budget decisions here in the school district. The district strategy is that the Tewksbury Public Schools community believes that our educational program will encompass a 21st century teaching and learning approach that promotes consistent growth among our students and staff to achieve academic, social, and emotional success for all students. And to help us get there, we developed this theory of action. If the Tewksbury Public Schools prioritizes a growth mindset amongst all stakeholders while providing quality professional development and a professional culture grounded in collaboration, then all students will experience innovative, student-centered instruction prioritizing positive outcomes. Those were some, those came out of some workshops we ran with our administrative team, staff, and school committee. And we like to keep those in mind as we make any budget or operational decisions here in the school district. So just starting out with some of the challenge we faced in formulating our FY22 budget due to the pandemic. Sort of on the left side here is what we typically do, the typical procedures and practices we use to develop the budget. And then on the right side was sort of the unknowns or the obstacles we ran into because of the COVID pandemic. Typically, the state budget's known and predictable. It was much later in being finalized this year, so it was very tentative as we were developing our budget in December and January timeframes. Typically, our local revenues develop a predictable pattern. Due to COVID, they're much less predictable this year. Those are sort of issues we dealt with working with the town manager as we were developing the budget early on in the process. Typically, we have a traditional school model that's followed. The school model is unclear at this time. The school model will be following for FY22. We're planning for a return to normal, and it seems like we're heading in that direction right now, but it's still not completely 100% locked that we will be in a normal model next year for FY22. So that's makes budgeting a bit challenging. Typically, we use prior year's actuals and current year's run rate sort of to determine needs and or budget opportunities, areas where we may be under budget, we may be running over budget. We like to look at those numbers year over year. With school year 2019, 2020, we're shut down for 1/3 of the school year. Operations were not normal. So our spending trends and patterns were very atypical. So it was hard to sort of use that to project out into the future. Particularly in our operating accounts, it was easier to sort of back into our salary numbers, but our operating accounts, things like utilities and supplies, things of that nature were a little bit more difficult to predict. Typically, we use payroll records to roll forward staff. Due to the high number of leave of absences and one-year hires we had in our district this year, we had to just carefully review that with our building principals and department heads to make sure we knew who was coming back from any one-year leave of absences and any one-year hires we made to replace those folks, or we're working at a building level as a substitute. Make sure those folks came off of our books for FY22 as appropriate. Typically, our meetings with principals and department heads are to discuss new initiatives and programs that we might want to bring on, software or some pilot programs and curriculum. The operational uncertainty this year made it virtually impossible to plan for new initiatives and programs. It was our principals were straight out just kind of in survival mode this year, so it was very difficult to work on any new initiatives or programs. Also COVID related on this slide are some recurring costs that we want to keep on our radar that may be necessary to fund during school year 21-22. A lot of question marks you'll see, just because, still a lot of unknowns. Pool testing, we're starting a pilot program into pool testing. We're hoping to kick it off this week. Pool testing is where we test groups of our school community. It's less expensive than individual tests. We could test, I think it's like 12 to 15 people using one test rather than individual tests for each person. If we get a negative result from all 12 or 15 of those participants, we know that group is good and can move safely into the school environment. If anybody in that group tests positive, we have an ability to perform a rapid test on those individuals and narrow it down to who exactly is a positive case. We felt that pool testing was offered by the state for a 6-week trial period at their expense. So we're dipping our toe into the pool testing to see if it gives us any useful data to determine whether we should be having kids in school, not in school, or how the model should look for our day-to-day operations. Next year, we're not sure what remote learning will look like or if it will be continued. We're waiting for some guidance on the state, if that will be taken over by the state, if it will run by the state, if they're still asking us to run a local remote learning opportunity for students. So what that looks like will have an impact on how we staff going into next year. We're keeping additional transportation costs sort of on the radar. We don't feel like we've had any extreme additional transportation costs to this point. And the Department of Ed has lifted some of the restrictions that we were facing earlier in the year as far as capacity on buses. But if any of that changes, school hours, times, anything like that, we could be looking at additional transportation costs, but right now, we're in pretty good shape from a transportation perspective. Leave of absence costs, we're keeping on the radar as well, depending on the nature and the length of the leave. It could be added costs. There also could be a savings in some of those areas. Sometimes when we have a senior employee go out and replaced with a new employee, we see a savings with those leave of absence. So we're just keeping that on the radar, affecting the budget one way or another. Mitigation and PPE procedures and/or products. We want to be able to continue supplying for students and staff into next year. We anticipate that will be a need of the district. And then just the overall length of the pandemic, when we can sort of return to normal officially here in the district, will have a potential impact on our budget next year. I think this is our last COVID slide. These are just COVID expenses that we've incurred so far in FY21, broken out into categories. We've been presenting this sort of ongoing as we've had our budget presentations. Custodial overtime to do enhanced cleaning. Every time we have had a positive case in the schools, we did an enhanced clean of the area that the student or staff may have been in during the school day. If there was a school time incident. We also did some enhanced cleaning of our buildings every time we had a cohort change. On Wednesdays, when we were in the hybrid schedule with Wednesdays off, we did a enhanced clean then, and on the weekends, as we had a different cohort coming in on Monday. Nurse overtime, this is contact tracing that our nurses have been doing. They've been doing outstanding work, keeping our contact tracing in order and our good handle on where we are as a district as far as positive cases, current cases, and that required some extra work on their part. So we had some nurse overtime, which is unusual for us in the district. Information technology overtime. At the beginning of the year, they were undertaking some extra work to make sure our systems were up and running constantly at all times in good shape. That seems to have died off of late. We haven't had a lot of that going on recently. Student services we highlighted here. That's a sort of a newer expense. We're providing sort of catch-up services for some of our higher needs students in the areas of occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, behavior. Some of these services are provided in school and are really not as effective in a remote setting. And some of these services are actually provided in students' homes and haven't been able to be provided basically since March of last year. So we're anticipating and starting to see now sort of an incremental cost of getting those students sort of back to the adequate progress that we would like to see them have in those areas. These areas are all operating, cleaning supplies, equipment, and PPE. We've done almost 200,000 in that category to this point. Contracted cleaning. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had some contracted cleaning services done of our school buildings. The HVAC maintenance costs. We've upgraded our filters and in our high school, upgraded our filters where possible in our K-8 schools, and we're able to purchase air purifiers for each of our spaces in our K-8 schools, so that we're able to improve HVAC to the greatest extent possible in all of our buildings. We've had some instructional supplies that we've purchased as a result of the pandemic, to the tune of about $50,000 to this point. Instructional technology as well, maintenance of equipment, and a little bit in student transportation, mostly in just enhanced cleaning of the buses in between routes. So our total to this point in FY21 COVID-related expenses is about $730,000 to this point, most of which we will be able to charge to grants. We'll get to a grant slide coming up later in the presentation. So our typical areas of focus, we usually hit personnel, technology, and building improvements as we develop our budgets. Couple of areas that we were focused on in personnel. Collective bargaining agreements, we have no contracts in place beyond FY21. So that's a bit of an unknown, as our collective bargaining agreements with our teachers, aides, secretaries, custodians, administrators will continue through the rest of this year. And we'll have a better idea of what those actual figures turn out to be. The other one I touched on a little bit earlier in the earlier slide, assuring we make an accurate counting and tracking of any COVID-related leave of absences and one-year replacements and new hires. That was something that we really focused on when we met with our principals and department heads. Again, from the earlier slide, funding student services adequately to make sure we recover from COVID-related progress reduction. And this is what we're starting to see these expenses trickle in during FY21, and expect that those expenses will continue through FY22 for those students. We have our K-4 team has gotten really skilled at collaboration to ensure a maximum utilization of school resources. They really did a deep dive into our specialist teaching positions, our art, our phys ed, our music, and our technology, shared teaching staff, and made sure that those folks were assigned appropriately to make sure that we had adequate coverage in those subject areas. And they continue to collaborate on other areas as well, specialists in special education and special ed service providers that are employees. They do a great job making sure that those folks are scheduled to maximize the benefit to students. The other thing we had to keep in mind as we were developing our FY22 budget was this is our last year under the current school model. Oops. I didn't click that. See if I can get back to that slide. Oops. But our last year under that, I'm sorry, I don't know how to click back to that slide. But one of the concerns was that FY23 will be opening a new elementary school. So we were cautious to not make any personnel decisions that had a long-term impact at the K-4 level with the new school right on the horizon. The areas of technology we're focused on school and network security. We have to make sure all of our software is secure from a student identification perspective, and that our network is secure at all times and up and running. Device maintenance and replacement. We have a robust replacement plan for our devices based on the age that these devices are expected to last. We want to make sure our devices that are so important to our student learning are always up and working. We're working on our monitoring systems so we can stay ahead of problems and not find out about problems, the day of school. And also always looking at printing solutions and how to work with less paper and become more reliant on electronic versions of our documents. In the area of building improvements, just general upkeep of our older buildings. Building security is always a concern. We have 2 vestibules left to complete. And our camera systems, we're always upgrading. We did some major upgrades on our camera systems over the last couple of years and have a really robust camera system in all of our schools. Always looking at our building systems, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, and creating STEM and maker spaces in each of our schools is an important aspect for our instructional staff so that they can be prepared to provide that type of education for students as we move forward. So overall, the school department budget in the areas of salary, operating, and capital outlay, we're looking for a 2.58% increase. If you add in the fixed costs that are associated with the district, it's a 1.3 increase for the school department related expenses. Our debt is where we see a large decrease. That's debt on our school building projects, the high school and the new elementary school. It's a decreasing debt year over year. So it's a naturally decreasing amount that we will see in debt as we move forward. Overall, our salary represents 70% of the school budget. We assumed level staffing to start for FY22 within our budget. We know if we have new staff needed, that due to COVID, we will likely fund those with grants. I'll get to as we move further into the grant section of the presentation. These increases account for our contractual step and longevity increases that we know about at this point. We did an estimate on the base salary increase for each of our groups because, as we said, we had no contracts in place for these groups beyond FY21. This is our salary budget broken down by group. You can see the bulk of our budget, bulk of our salary budget, about 2/3 is in teachers, as expected. The other group's much smaller as far as numbers, headcount wise, and dollar wise. Operating represents 28% of the school budget. It's a little more spread out than the salary budget is. Tuition, transportation are our biggest operating categories. Special education services and supplies and textbooks, sort of the next in line in that area, but definitely more spread out than our salary budget, and operating represents 28% of our overall school budget. Our capital outlay is 2% of our school budget. Our priority for next year is the Ryan roof. We put out to bid a bid on a roof coating process. We've completed a project similar to this at the Heathbrook School. Had no reported leaks since its installation, so it seems to be a success. It's a rubberized coating product that goes right over the roof we have now. The Heathbrook project came with a 10-year warranty. Now they've made some improvements to this product. Now it's offered with a 20-year warranty as opposed to the 10-year that we got with the Heathbrook project. The Ryan roof is close to the end of its life. Building opened in '99. Those roofs generally have a 25-year lifespan. We're experiencing leaking in the school, and with the construction project already sort of on this site here at the Pleasant Street site of the new school and the Ryan School, we felt like it'd probably be a good time to undertake that project. So we were planning on dedicating the whole capital outlay budget of $850,000 to that Ryan roofing project. Typically, we earmark $250,000 of this capital outlay for textbooks. We talked to the curriculum folks about skipping that this year to allow us to get this Ryan roof project done, which we felt was an important project to complete for the overall well-being of that building. We just opened bids last week. The low bid was a known contractor that we've used before on some work at the high school. Came in at $729,000, so quite a bit lower than our original estimate we had of $895,000. So we expect to fund that project with next year's $729,000 of the $850,000 and still be able to upgrade our textbooks to the tune of $121,000, so we can continue with our textbook upgrade and replacement program just on a smaller level next year. These are some of the projects that we are keeping on the watch list for FY22, FY23. Most of them are in the areas of school security, our vestibules. We still have to do doing in the Heathbrook School. I highlighted here a lighting project that we just got a proposal from Guardian Energy. It's an energy reduction project and also provides better quality lights to our school buildings. They proposed an upgrade to the Heathbrook School. We did 80% of the building earlier this year in conjunction with the Green Committee. So this project that they proposed would be the other 20% of the building that we haven't completed to this point. And they're also gave us a proposal on the second floor classrooms at the Wynn School. So those are projects we really, we get an incentive from National Grid, and about those projects come with about a 5 to 5.5 year expected return on investment. So those are some projects we're really are kind of moving to the head of the class in our desire to get those completed. These are just some of the capital projects that we've completed over the past few years. Again, building security, cameras, overall building maintenance. We've been able to get a lot of work done in our school buildings over the last, I would say, 5 years, thanks to the support we've received from the school committee, finance committee, selectmen, and our town manager really got a lot done, and continued onto this page. And even in COVID, this COVID environment, we're able to get a lot of work done in these buildings, working with our maintenance group in conjunction with the town. Onto grants and revolving accounts. We have 58 separate funds that we currently manage in the business office here. We're working with the auditor's office on trying to reduce those numbers. We had 62 last year. We'll continue to assess those and clean up. Some of these are some older activities that aren't in place anymore. Some of them are grants that are active, some of them are grants that are no longer active. So as we spend down those funds, we'd like to get those closed out. It's something that the town accountant has been working with us on doing. But all of these funds have a specific purpose, and they must be used appropriately. If we raise money, in parking fees, we have to spend those funds on parking related expenses. We use some of those types of funds to, like parking fees, for example, we use to fund some of our salaries of our security personnel that patrol those parking lots and help us out in those areas. A couple of these I'd like to call to your attention. Food services, completely self-funded program. That's a self-sufficient. The salaries of our food service workers, the supplies, the food products, all come through revenues generated from either meal sales or reimbursements through the federal or state government. Our circuit breaker account is a large one for us. It's up to about a little over $2 million a year right now. We use that to offset costs of out-of-district tuitions for some of our special ed students. The Special Ed 240 grant and our Title I grants are used to fund about between 8 and 12 positions in a given year related to Title I as a reading improvement grant, and Special Ed 240 is a special education grant. So those grants total close to right around $1 million a year for us that we use to fund very important positions in the district. This is a look at our grant funding available in FY21. We generally get our final grant numbers for FY22 at some point during the spring. So we generally look at what our grant funding looks like for the current year, and that generally predicts what we'll be receiving in FY22 in the following year as well. Little bit of a different look at our grants this year, and typically in the past, grants that we received during FY19 or FY20, we spent during FY19 or FY20, moved on from that grant to the next year. The Department of Ed has made some changes to how they allow us to spend grants, and most of the grants that we receive can be now spent over 2 years. We have carryover that we're able to do from 1 year to the next. And last year, recognizing that a lot of these grants weren't going to be able to be spent due to the pandemic, the department allowed us to carry over grants from FY19 into FY21 as well. So you'll see some of it's a little more complicated than it used to be. We used to just have a grant total that we received for the year. That would be it. We moved on from that. Now we have, most of these grants will have a 2-year lifespan. So we'll carry over some funding from FY20 into FY21, from FY21 into FY22, and be able to expend those grants over a 2-year span now. These grants right here that I have my cursor on are all COVID-related expense grants that have different expirations. These top 3 need to be expended by June of 2021. And some of these other ones, ESSER 2 extends as far into 2023 on COVID-related expenses as well. So we feel like we're in a pretty good shape for to handle COVID-related expenses as we move into FY21, and even if any of it extends into FY23, we should be able to handle anything that should arise as far as a COVID-related expense comes from. This is what our overall budget will look like with the fixed costs expanded. Sort of, this is what we would expect it to look like at town meeting. We've had a reduction in healthcare costs with the new programs that are being offered through the town and Blue Cross Blue Shield. And our debt reduction also is identified down here. Next steps, we will continue discussions with building principals, department heads, town officials, elected officials, teachers, parents. Also keep our eye on any COVID-related changes to react to our ever-changing school district needs. Needs or resources change. The school department will be refining our project list, which represents a snapshot in time of the current needs of the district. This list is constantly being updated and analyzed for the best use of available and appropriate resources. And that process will continue from now through May town meeting, and may, and in fact is likely to produce some movement within our overall budget. You know, we may move some salaries into operating into salaries, capital outlay, movements such as that, as those changes become, as those figures become clearer as we move into the spring. But the district is confident that we will be able to operate successfully in the $69,637,971 figure. That's in agreement with what the town manager recommended. That is our presentation. Let me figure out how to get out of sharing mode here.
Well, thank you for the detailed presentation. That was quite a bit packed in there.
Yeah.
Did you want to go over some of the questions we submitted last week?
Sure.
Hey, Rob.
Rich, yes.
Sorry for jumping in. Before we jump into those, since this presentation is still up here, would it be prudent to go through these? If there's any questions on these slides before that?
Yeah, I mean, this covers pretty much everything in these slides, but yeah, I mean, if you have something specific that was mentioned in the presentation, yeah,
Yes,
I'll take
on,
those. Okay.
sure. On slide number 4,
Mhm.
let's see. Okay, you talked about high number of leave of absence and 1-year hires. Do we know, this past year, given that leave of absence and 1-year hires, was that a net? Did we spend less, spend more money?
I think overall that would have cost us money. We started out the year under the FFCRA out of the federal government, which allowed individuals with child care issues to be paid on leave. In addition, we had about 8 or 9 staff members on American Disabilities Act accommodations, which allowed them to work remotely, which in some cases we had to replace those staff in person. And for those staff that were accommodated for childcare, which we, on any given day, we averaged in the probably mid 30s amount of staff, sometimes they would have to be covered and so forth. The second half of the year after December 31st really led us down the road a little bit of non-paid leave, where that's where that net might have helped us a little bit, particularly with a veteran staff member who might be on leave and possibly the replacement personnel coming in at a lower rate. But really, this has been a hodgepodge of accommodating many of our staff members with some time working remotely, and then also at the same time kind of doing some patchwork to cover students who are in person. So we had an additional teacher at each school hired at the beginning of the year as a long-term sub just for these kind of mix and match situations. And going into this full in-person return, which is being mandated by the state starting on April 5th, we know we're going to need more staff to accomplish this. Now, not all of them have to be professionally licensed staff, but with that amount of other bodies coming in and staff who are accommodated to work remotely, we're definitely going to need more staff to accomplish that. The good part is the COVID ESSER funds will really help us on that. So it should not impact the operational budget, but it will overall be a larger cost for staffing.
Okay, and that led me to right into the next question I had on the slide that shows the COVID grants. I think it's further down.
Yep.
And when they expire. It's 18. Yeah, that's the one. So it's our intention to utilize that money in any way, shape, or form that we can before it runs out, right?
Absolutely. And we have multiple ideas and thoughts of how to do that. Dave's been extraordinarily frugal on that grant money. We've maintained our kind of operational thoughtfulness as approach to this, but we know that the cost of this pandemic is not going to end at the end of this school year. We're going to continue to have to plan. We're going to have staff going out on leave again here probably shortly in regards to more students returning to school. And we don't know if that's going to impact us next year or the following year. There's a lot of these aspects that we know are not going to change anytime soon, whether it's the amount of PPE, the mitigation services we have in there, the pool testing, which is right now is a free pilot by the state. By mid-April, we have to absorb the full cost of that. That's approximately $5 to $6 per swab per test, not to mention the overhead of the personnel that helps to run that piece. So there's a lot of cost that we anticipate will continue, if not increase, in regards to the pandemic. And thanks to Dave's work, we've been able to be very thoughtful about that ESSER money so that we can use it effectively for these costs coming up.
Okay. And one last question on the slide near the end. I think it was the department. Yeah, the department 21. Specifically on the debt principal and interest coming off. Could you just be specific on where is that coming off from? Is that from which override or which debt service is it coming off of?
I believe that's coming off of our high school and our new school building debt. Is that correct, Richard?
Yeah, that's correct. It's coming off of those two, and then there are still some other school projects that have debt on them. I can send the finance committee the updated debt schedule for the entire town, and you can see where it's coming off.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Rob.
Okay. Does anybody else have any specific questions on the presentation? If not, maybe we can jump to the questions that we sent last week. Some of it may be duplicated, but I think it's worth going through. Do you want me to share the document
Sure.
that we got? Let's see. So,
While he's doing that, Dave, thank you for the heads up on that DOE website with all the data in there. That was a plethora of great information.
Yeah, it is. And it's pretty easy to navigate too. I like the way it's set out.
Yep.
okay, so our first question here was, for this fiscal year, do we have any idea how much money spent on COVID-related issues in schools will be reimbursed by the state and our federal government? You pretty much covered that, but I think the answer is we expect all of it to be covered.
You're right, Rob. No, that's exactly it. And one of the ones to watch there is that student services line with special education with compensatory services. So even though the state wasn't shut down and all students were required to go remote, we were still required to provide services for special education students. So if they were not able physically to come into school, that becomes a compensatory service, which means we owe them that service later on. And we're in the process right now, if you take, for example, speech and language services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, if they have X amount of sessions a week and they were not able to get that for X amount of months, they are still entitled to that service while we are still providing their regular service. So we do expect the cost to come in with that. We have a solid plan on how to do that, but there'll be some costs in there that will have to be offset by the grants. We anticipate with more students returning on April 5th that our cleaning costs will increase. We're looking at some other manpower issues to help us with the cleaning. The investment into some of the materials and the devices we're using for the cleaning has really paid off as far as efficiency. So we're very happy with that. But again, those are going to continue to grow. And as we have more students in every day, there's more cleaning. If we bring back our before and after school programming, that's more. Running athletics, we're still running athletics right now. So all these pieces have to meet the mitigation strategies of COVID, which requires some extensive ongoing cleaning, more so than we've been doing. But the good news is, right, that these costs right now are covered predominantly under the ESSER and other COVID relief. And the way Dave's handled it is we're in a really good spot that whatever comes up next, we'll be able to also handle that under that ESSER funding. So we don't perceive that this is going to hit our operational budget, hopefully down the road.
Great.
And we're still finding out about grants. About 2 or 3 weeks ago is when we found out about the state, the $126,000 grant that's run by the state. Was sort of sort of an unknown until a couple, 3 weeks ago. So, and that needs to be spent by the end of the year. So that's sort of jumping to the head of the class with getting expended before June of 2021.
Okay. So the other part of this, I think we've already covered as well, but will any FY22 costs be covered? And you answered basically yes, and the deadline to spend is over here in the right column, right? So I'll move on to number 2. Can we break out how many students will be shifting to different schools in town over the next few years?
And I asked a follow-up question. I wasn't sure if you were talking about out of district shifting into different schools or just from our age progression, moving from 2nd to 3rd grade, or 4th to 5th. We have transitions at grades 2, 4, 6, and 8 in town, just sort of a natural age of the students. So out of district placements are very difficult to predict into the future. We know who we have now and who's going to be aging out, but we really don't know who's on the horizon, who might move into town, or just be evaluated as a candidate for an out of district placement. So
I think we've also done a good job of investing in the infrastructure of in-district special education programs. We've increased our substantially separate classrooms within the district over the past few years, and that's allowed us to keep more students in the district rather than having the need for them to go out to an out-of-district placement. We have had a little bit of an uptick recently in move-ins, students coming from other districts who have already been identified on their individual education plan as far as requiring an out-of-district placement. But I think the more work we can do internally on our own special education infrastructure and provide those services at a high rate to support students, that's going to be our best offset to high-priced out-of-district tuitions. So we're going to keep working in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Did anybody from the committee have a follow-up for this topic? No? Yeah. Oh, there's a little more to it, I guess. Has the number of students that have been made the choice of going to Shawshene Tech changed over the past few years? I don't know if there's a good trend forming here, but
yeah, Rob, some of this also has to do with the fact that we have enrollment blips at different grade levels, and you're kind of seeing one go right through our own high school that kind of matches this enrollment at Shaw Tech, with larger numbers in one grades than the other. It does. After we get through this kind of cohort at the high school level, we have a couple different blips down in the 3rd and 4th grade, but other than that, it's fairly stable going through. Student interests, all kinds of things influence the vocational school piece and the different programming that they have there. And again, they're able to provide that programming, and actually, by regulation, we're not. So it provides a great outlet for students who are looking for that vocational track. We've added some programming at our high school around dual enrollment type programs, particularly with UMass Lowell and some other pieces like that. So, there's some solid pieces going on there on both ends. So, we continue to work to provide the most appropriate and broad curriculum and programming for our high school students. But there's going to be times when they're just seeking out, special shops and programs that are only available at the vocational technical school.
okay. And is the going to Shawshene and whatnot, is that the tuition line you had on the expenses on our your expense?
The cost of, and Richard, if you can correct me, that the cost of Shaw Tech goes directly to the town. It does not influence our budget. Is that a correct statement, Richard?
Correct, yeah, it's just, it's not part of the school budget at all, separate
Oh, okay.
totally.
Yeah,
Okay,
Rob, those tuitions are for out of the district special education students.
Oh, okay.
We don't have an appropriate educational program for within the district.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, the third question here is on transportation. Are we planning on resuming pre-COVID bus limits for this fall?
Yeah.
We're pretty close. Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
there's still some mitigation strategies around assigned seats, open windows, which thank God we're into a little bit warmer weather. But there are some pieces on there. But you know, they're at the point right now where they're very close to basically having the same rideability as we had pre-COVID, and it should not impact all of our students returning K-6 on April 5th, and the middle school and the high school on April 28th.
Okay, great. Next one is number of teachers. What are our needs based on retirements?
Yeah, so right now we're at 3 retirements at the end of this year, 1 FY22 and 2 FY23.
Okay.
So,
And then the follow-up is, or the next one is what are needs based on grade levels? And can teachers literally shift between grades?
There's a bidding process basically with openings within the teachers union contract that they can look at things, but they also have to be appropriately licensed for that grade level or content subject area. The known retirements for next year, those positions have already been posted.
Okay. The next one is travel. Need to take a deep dive into this. If there let's say need to take a deep dive into this. If there's one thing that COVID has taught us is the remote work for adults works. So I'm interested in seeing what the travel budget is for schools might look like for FY22.
yeah, we don't do much travel in the district. Most of our conferences are state run. So have very limited travel. Sometimes we get some mileage vouchers from staff that attend our conferences, but not a lot of real distance traveling going on in our budgets.
Okay. Community education question. Interested in hearing if we are proposing that, as it has been in the past, can some community education be remote?
Yeah, so our community education's pretty much self-funding. We offer programs. If folks come to us with a class idea, we put it in the brochure and market it a little bit, and usually have a break-even number of students that we need to enroll in order for the program to run. If we have enough interest, we'll run the program, but we have to cover the cost of the teacher and any supplies and materials that are required to run the program. So we tried a couple of remote classes during the pandemic, but they just haven't caught on to this point. So we're kind of on a holding pattern with that until we get back to the point where we can run some in-person classes. I believe
Okay.
there's a follow-up about that as well. Yeah.
Here it is.
Rob, I'm sorry, could I jump in on that last one real quick?
Sure.
There'll also be, if we do end up doing community education, and it'd also be a cost that expended for more deep cleaning, correct?
That's a great point, Rich. And almost everything we look at right now has to go through that lens. Whether it's right now, our gyms at our schools really can't be used because they're full of furniture. But anything that we're looking at that's going to have people in the building, right now we don't have visitors in our schools. We're going to be bringing all students back, but anything beyond that, we have to think through the cleaning lens and have to think how we can disinfect those areas and utilize those areas effectively for multiple transitions. And the main point would be, how do we know that that building is completely clean for when students arrive there in the morning? So it's a great point. That's an added piece on any aspect of what we've seen is traditional use of the schools beyond the school classroom day has to have that impact thought of.
Yeah, because honestly, given that, I would contend that we shouldn't even be thinking about community education with those.
Right. We haven't really looked at anything coming in after school hours. There's nothing going on the weekends. We do have some cleaning apparatus that make it a little bit easier. It will cost money with personnel, and we still have to utilize the materials. But as we have success with things like athletics, there's a football game tonight. We never thought we'd be playing football, certainly not in March, but with all these restrictions going on, we never thought we'd be doing something like this. So it's going to come in pieces. And if we keep moving in that direction, have good protocols, have good mitigation strategies, have the equipment and the personnel to deal with it, I think we can inch our way back there. I think about something like the walking club at the high school and things like that, where if we had a confined area that we could clean right afterwards and do some of those things, we'd love to have those opportunities present themselves. But as of right now, the priority is for the schools to be open for all students to return on April 5th. It's going to be twice as many students as we've ever had. We want to make sure the schools are safe for that. And we've got great cleaning protocols for our students. Once we have that down, then we can consider, what other things can we possibly fit in and keep those safety protocols going at the same time.
Okay.
Okay. So the next thing, I think we already kind of covered this, the staffing levels, or actually it says right here. What's the staffing level for FY22? It's planned on level staffing. Staffing level matrix, as in previous years, it would be helpful to have in advance if possible. Did we get that? I don't remember seeing that. But
I believe it's attached at the bottom of the
sheet?
PDF.
Is this it here? No, that's bed numbers.
It was a separate attachment.
Yeah, I don't see it. Sorry. Did anybody else see it? Well, maybe if we could get a copy, that would be sufficient.
I might be able to open it here.
I think if you just send it to, I don't know if you have all our emails, but maybe Richard, and he can get it to us.
We can do that.
There is an
Okay.
attachment in the email that Richard sent out that has
Is it-
head count numbers.
Oh, okay. Then never mind. I must have missed that. Sorry. You already talked about turnover. Operational. What are the impacts due to COVID and how are they being managed? I think we've talked about that quite a bit. Technology. What short-term investments were made to support COVID remote teaching and how is it being factored into long-term planning?
Yeah, there's some good things here. I mean, granted, we had to go to a shutdown, statewide shutdown, followed by enrichment, followed by remote. But kind of what's come out of this is some great new teaching tools, some other pieces. We've invested in even some more clear touch boards. We've got, a plethora of interactive softwares between Zoom, Google Meet, Biloxi. Some of these are being used very well. We'll keep up with the cost of those licensing. We did not anticipate that, but they're being very successful with them. We have over 1,300, probably 1,326 devices out in homes right now to students and families. And we have ample back in the buildings right now to support a full student return. So, the support to those, to keep those going, the wear and tear in those, we have a great device transition program to keep those lively and going. We've been on the kind of the forefront of those. We did all our device ordering in February of last year before the shutdown, anticipating that the COVID was going to have an impact on all of us. So the investment we've had in technology and the success that we've had, I think, with the instruction, part of that will live on after this pandemic. So we're proud of that, and we're very happy about it.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just to follow on to that, Mr. Superintendent. So I'm actually glad to hear you say that, but I'm just wondering, do you have kind of any order of magnitude of how that increases your operating budget year over year?
Great point, Dave. I think a lot of it is, and you've all seen this over the past couple of years, a lot of the technology money we've spent from the budget has been specific to infrastructure, servers, fiber, all those pieces. And because of that investment, we're to keep this up, we've already projected out what the device turnover pieces will be, what ability to analyze new software, teaching software coming in, how to vet it. We've just recently gone through some significant security auditing that we paid for, and it's told us as we live in the cloud, which 5 years ago, we weren't living in the cloud. Now we're living in the cloud. How do we make sure we have appropriate authentications with sign-ins? How do we prevent ourselves from phishing attacks? How do we prevent ourselves from ransom type situations? So that's that next level, which is an investment. It's kind of a blind item. You don't see it, but we want to protect this infrastructure that we've developed. We want to make sure that these devices work. We've seen districts around us who have tried different means, and some have gone well, some haven't. So we learn from all those experiences. But we're really at that next level, anticipating that the level of technology interaction between teachers and students actually will not decrease when the pandemic goes away. And, how do we support that going forward when we're not doing it out of purely necessity out of a pandemic, but doing it out of it's the right way to teach and learn, and it's going to be better for our kids in the long run. So I think we're overall, the pandemic has actually helped us in that a little bit. So we've really kept our foot on the gas as far as technology goes.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. And you actually just answered my next question about online security concerns. So I just want to make sure looking forward, we're considering your operational budget, being able to really look at those technology investments and support them year over year, as opposed to thinking about them as just a COVID thing.
Right. Absolutely.
No, thank you very much.
We had Jason Stamp and his staff do a great job of, they have their inventory down and they know when machines are getting ready to fail, and when we need to replace them. So they're really on top of that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I just had a quick question in regards to the technology. Have you had to hire or outsource any tech support for all the number of people that are, doing the remote stuff these days?
Great question, Rob. I think one of our proudest pieces here is that we reorganized the tech department about 3 years ago and made an effort to really define the type of individuals we wanted to hire, what their skill sets were. We were actually able to attract a couple people from private business in, and we actually have less total tech staff than we did 5 years ago. And I would tell you, we're 100 times more diverse and intricate as far as our technology capability as a school district than we were. So a lot of that goes to Jason Stamp and a commitment to that piece, hiring the right people. There's only 1 or 2 individuals who have been here more than 3 years, and we get some great outside ideas on how to use the technology and some great ideas on how to really have an improved network. And I think you'd be shocked to hear that, with over 1,300 devices out in homes, we very rarely have a technology support need going out to them because of the work all those individuals do, programming those devices, providing instruction, making it easy and effortless for families.
Do you get the computer ate my homework excuse?
Not too much yet, but the communication on that's great though between the teachers and the kids, particularly during this. And some of our kids, I will tell you right now, have really flourished. They're just not the type of kid who is too social or too much to this, to that, and they've actually flourished in the technology environment. I would tell you it's better for all kids to be in school, in-person learning, but it has had a positive impact on some of our kids.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave, I think we're getting a little feedback from your machine a little bit.
So let me mute.
Thanks. Let's see, where were we? Are we evaluating cloud options for any components? Constantly evaluating.
Yeah. It's absolutely the cloud piece is something, and we're working with multiple vendors all the time, where that used to be an in-house because it was a closed loop network. Now, if you don't have the right vendors in place and are working with people who are pretty progressive, you're at risk at really not keeping up with what's happening.
Yep. Okay, on to SPED. How has COVID impacted SPED enrollments and teaching? How will that be applied for FY22 planning?
So a couple things on this. One, the state did allow or encourage what they refer to as high needs students to be coming to school more often than others. And while we were in the hybrid model, we immediately moved to have our most significant special education students and our English language learners. It also covered homeless students, students in foster care. Many of them, well over 100 special education students, they've been coming in 4 or 5 days a week the entire year. So we moved on that piece right away. Our special education staff does a great job. So part of this piece is going to be transitioning from that hybrid piece where kids may have access to a special education teacher remotely or in person, and now bringing that totally back to the in-person part. As maybe you know or you don't know, parents still have the right under the state regulation to keep their children in a remote learning environment. So even though all of our students are returning for K-6 on April 5th for a full day of school 5 days a week, we will still have approximately 20, we're hoping less, % of our students who remain in remote learning. So we still have to support them with staffing, devices if they need it, and all that, anything special education related, they're still entitled to those services, albeit virtually. But even some of our home services, which you can imagine we are unable to do because of COVID, the special education department kind of creatively developed a program at the Ryan School where if you were entitled to home services, it was reverse. You could bring your child to the Ryan School at 5 p.m. and get your home services at the school. So it allowed us to keep up with the services, didn't create a problem with COVID and going into people's homes, provided a service for the students. So it's some of that's kind of keeping that thinking going and looking at that. As far as staffing and costs for that, one of the things we'll have to think about is looking at some contract services to probably help us with the compensatory services. If all our therapists and ancillary services are doing their job during the day, it's going to be impossible for them to make up the backlog of when students were not here. So we've contracted out a little bit of that. We'll continue to do that. Some districts have not even started that process. That process has been underway for us for months. So we've already got a pretty good dent on it. And we really hope to have, before we start school in the fall, we really hope to have put a huge dent in any compensatory services that will be owed to students and families.
Great. The next thing is about.
Rob, could I jump in with a question?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Malone, you mentioned that it's your estimate is that 20% of the students will choose to come back full time.
And it's actually the opposite, Rich. I'm sorry, I might have misspoken. So our initial survey about 2-3 weeks ago was about 20%. We have a new one out right now. It should be less, but that is the percent of students who will remain remote. So the other 80% will be coming back in person full. So, okay. Right.
And is that the 20% who are choosing not to come back to the remote learning academy?
That is correct.
Okay.
For the most part, we have some students that went remote later in the year and chose to stay with the class that they were in the hybrid model with. And at Tewksbury Memorial High School, all of our students are programmed as if they were there. So they are not in a separate remote learning academy. If you were programmed for chemistry, you were in chemistry day one this year, whether you were remote or in a hybrid. So when we go back, what our teachers have learned and done a great job with, and really from day one from the high school, is our teachers are teaching synchronously at the same time the students that are in front of them and students that are in home. So it's the same course. When we get down to the middle school on down, those students who have been remote all year do have separate teachers. Same curriculum, but separate teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Quick follow-up. What's the percent now that's in the remote learning academy?
It's still about 20%. What we're looking for is a commitment to align with the April 5th return of full student. And we put the survey out last night. So we've got about 1,600 responses. We do expect that 20% of remote learners to shrink, with more of them returning to in person. We just don't know how much. We don't know if it's going to be significant to affect any staffing or large scale pieces. It may or may not. Some districts have seen some large swings. Our initial survey out a few weeks ago didn't tell us there was going to be a large one. We've seen an indication there might be more, but it's probably not going to be enough to have any drastic effect on staffing or placement type pieces.
Okay, thank you. Let's see what else we got here. We got the enrollment numbers. I assume that was attached. We can find it at this URL. Any new services planned for student population in FY22? Any new services are retired planned?
Yeah. Chris, do you want to take that one? Panorama Education with Karen Baker O'Brien?
Right. So we have a couple different pieces looking at. One is the state has been silent whether we're going to be required to run remote learning next year.
Yes.
That could be a possibility. The initial indications from the state is likely that it's not, but we don't know what the track of this pandemic is. If we have to run a remote learning option for students again next year, that's either going to affect us on our own staffing wise, or what some different districts have done is either partially tuitioned those students or had them join the Massachusetts Virtual Academy, which there would no longer be a student of ours. Therefore, we wouldn't get the state aid that's aligned with that enrollment number. So those are some big pieces that we're looking at. We have quite a few pieces around social emotional learning for students. We expect that many of our students who have either not been in school because they were remote or because of the hybrid model, we're concerned that emergency room visits for psychiatric reasons for adolescents has gone up. We're concerned that many of our very youngest learners haven't been in school. We're likely going to have first and second graders next year who haven't entered the door of a physical school before. And what does that mean for them? And how are we going to have to help them learn what school is all about? We have parents out there that are really trying to debate whether they want to try to have their child retained for next year because they feel that this was somewhat of a lost year for learning, which we would disagree with. But it is going to be trying to work through all of those pieces and how we can best meet our students and help them to try to find their way in some of these pieces of a pandemic. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but I can't imagine a pandemic hitting me in a formative year of schooling and what kind of impact that will be. But we've also done some partnering with the Tewksbury Police Department, some other pieces. We really see next year is kind of that piece where we can ramp up and do things like all of our clubs and plays and chorus have all been virtual, not in person. That's a big impact of our school culture. How do we make that happen? We do anticipate that there will be some additional funding come from the state to look at what they're referring to as ramp up programming over the summer. This would be a way to work with students to kind of ramp them up academically heading into next fall to try to fill in some of the gaps that students have experienced. So we are expecting some funding to come out of that. We hope it goes hand in hand with that is hopefully this pandemic is trending in a direction that allows us to bring in as many students as we can and to provide those type services. So yeah, we foresee that there's going to be significant pieces that will affect our student population. And we've got to believe that there's going to be some that we can't even anticipate right now, that we still need to be ready to ensure that we have the budgetary capacity to support them when they occur.
Okay. I think that was the end of our questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have one follow-up question on enrollments for the superintendent. Do we understand the impact yet of the decreasing enrollment numbers on state aid and grants? I looked at the historical numbers and it just kind of seems to be a trend I want to make sure we're considering.
Absolutely, Dave. You're right on the mark. And the Superintendents Association right now is actively engaged at the State House level to look at the held harmless on enrollment. What we're seeing in Tewksbury is the same thing you're seeing all over Massachusetts in the suburban communities, not so much in the urban communities, but the suburban communities. So we're really looking to target that as a held harmless piece. There is some legislation out there to use this year's enrollment data. One of the issues you'll see with this year's enrollment data is every district is going to have a larger number of students who chose to be homeschooled, which means they're no longer enrolled with us in the district, that we don't receive funding for them. They've chosen that this is how they're going to handle the pandemic. But when the pandemic's over, they're likely coming back to us. So that's a blip in that piece. I did see some recent projection data from NESDEC on our enrollment, which has really been throwing us out over the next, 5 to 6 years as kind of that slow and then a plateau. And now I'm just seeing in the projections that those numbers are predicted to gradually to actually stabilize over the next year or two and then start going up for Tewksbury. So that's an interesting piece, but the state funding matched with the enrollment is something that Billerica is trying to deal with, Chelmsford's trying to deal with, everybody in our area. So we hope even if the legislation goes through to use this year's numbers, we do think that that will be a 1-year blip, hopefully. But it's an impact that we have to look over our shoulder all the time with our enrollment on the state funding. Absolutely.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll go around one at a time and we can, ask some additional questions or whatever. Rich, you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'm all set. You've answered all my questions.
Okay, Jason?
I'm all set, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Susan?
I don't have any questions.
Mr. Cook?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the Superintendent Malone and David Libby for responding the way they did with the questions. I think they did a good presentation. I think Dave's presentation was excellent. But I had no questions because I think the job was well done, both from our two fellow Finance Committee members, Dave Asnavorian and Richard, with their questions. I'll probably have some further review of the entire budget and maybe raise one question or two in our public hearing that we have on the annual town meeting warrant. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cook. Dave Asnavorian?
No, thank you. I'd like to second Tom there in that great presentation, great materials, as always. Thank you very much.
Okay, I just had a couple, hopefully quick questions. So initially in that presentation, Mr. Libby, one of the difficulties of putting the budget together was the state budget coming in a little late for obvious reasons. So did that come in sort of as expected, less than we were hoping for, more than we were hoping for?
Yeah, I think it was right around as expected. Correct, Richard?
Yeah, so the only thing we have right now is the governor's state aid numbers, and they're a little bit higher. It's less than $100,000 higher than what we projected level funded. So by the time it goes through the House and then the Senate and then Conference Committee, which is sometime in July, it will change another couple of times. But right now, there's no reason to make any adjustments.
Okay, I guess that's what I was looking at. Is there any major impact based on what we got or projected to get, I guess? Another question I had is if God forbid, we got to go hybrid starting in the fall, is there anything you would do differently and that may have different cost implications, or would it just be same game plan as we had this year and move forward?
It'd probably be, we've learned a great deal, and I think the teachers have really done a great job trying to develop this skill set in trying to drink from the fire hose every day with new information. One of the big changes was actually a Department of Labor Relations ruling that came out in January that kind of shifted the fact that school districts could now move from one model to the other without negotiating with the unions. Typically, we had to negotiate what the model would look like and when we would change it. The new ruling in the Department of Labor Relations said it was the school committee can make a change whenever they needed to. They would still have to impact the bargain the impact of that change. But that's a huge piece. We spend a lot of time bargaining town positivity rates, all kinds of metrics that would indicate whether it was safe to be in school, and yet 30 days later you'd find out that metric had no bearing on whether it was safe to be in school or not be in school. And a lot of it was, there was a lot of state level union pieces that really kind of stirred up a lot of these pieces. So a lot of time and energy was spent working on those pieces. And I think what we'll be able to do differently is from day one, focus on the impact of the students, set a game plan forward coming from the school committee on down, and implement it without roadblocks in the way. Our teachers did a great job with it on very short notice and have really shined in this whole piece for us. And I think the proof will be in not maybe what we see in kids on April 5th. The proof in that will be the end of next school year and the year after that, when our kids don't have the academic gaps that maybe other kids might have, because we put enough effort into the instruction, into building the relationships with the kids. Even though we were in a hybrid model, our teachers really worked hard to do that. And I think if this pandemic continues and we have to make other decisions, I just really am hopeful that that work can be done based on what's best for kids and what's the right thing educationally, and not on other peripheral things.
Okay, thank you. One other question I had was around the remote learning academy. If we're, I guess, required to do that for next year, are we expecting that the COVID grants money will apply to that? Because I guess I'm assuming the reason we'd be doing that is because there's still some COVID related risk.
And I would think it would even have to go beyond that if the state is going to require that piece. I think what we did, we approached this, we did some parent surveying and some other pieces. And what was really important to our parents was that their kids, if they were going to be remote, be taught by Tewksbury Public Schools teachers. Districts around us, some of them went to vendors, some of them went to canned online schooling. Others went to straight streaming. They just set a camera up in the classroom. There was nothing specific to the kids at home. We put a lot of energy and a lot of resources into supporting our kids that were remote. We probably can't replicate that next year if that occurs. We'll have to be honest about this. But I do think we did the right thing this year. Our kids who were remote, in my mind, had an outstanding educational experience. The parents who were remote, gave us a lot of great feedback on it. And I think that will benefit us in years to come. If we do need to provide some type of remote element for next year, we are going to have to probably think a little bit differently about how that would be accomplished.
Okay, that makes sense. Does anybody have any additional? I think we were all set there.
Yeah, Rob, the more you keep me online, the more I think of questions. Just two more. Mr. Libby, I'm always fearful of the price of gas going up because I see it going up every day. How do are we locked in with transportation for next year?
Yeah, our bus contract is locked in for, let's see, we signed this year, next year, and the year after.
Okay.
Our school buses and our vans are, we did sign a 1-year extension we had a 1-year option on our out-of-district student transportation. We exercised the option to continue that agreement into next year. We're in a 3-town agreement with Billerica and Chelmsford for our out-of-district students. We entered into that about 10 years ago as a sort of we found, if we were sending one van to a school in Beverly and Billerica was sending one van to a school in Beverly, let's share the vehicle and send one van with 2 kids to Beverly as opposed to each of us sending our own separate vehicles. So we agreed that with Billerica and Chelmsford that we would continue that arrangement for at least 1 more year and possibly put it out to bid for our out-of-district transportation after FY22.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, Rob, one more question to Mr. Malone. The 80 odd students we have going to Shawshene Tech, are they going back full time like Tewksbury is on April 5th or whatever?
It is statewide, Rich, so that even a vocational technical school has the same requirements. They were on a different hybrid program than we were for most of the year. Because of the shops in their rotation, they were on a week on, week off. So they
Yeah, shop 1 week,
shop one
and then-
week and then remote. So they were on a little different schedule. But right, they will be. They are of the same requirements, so they are going to have to. The high school one, so for Shaw Tech, which is still a high school, the commissioner's regulatory guidance right now is that middle schools are required to go back in full on April 28th. We are requiring our high school to go back on April 28th. It has been silent statewide about high schools actually having a return date. They are telling us they are going to give us that date in April. For us, because of the way we ran the hybrid at Tewksbury Memorial High School, it's not going to be as big of a struggle for us to get up and running. So we're going to open the high school for a full return, 5 days a week, full day of school on the same day that we do that at the Wynn, which will be April 28th. But right now, we don't know actually what the state mandated return for high school date is. It's probably going to be later than that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Libby and Superintendent Malone, for the detailed presentation and taking the time to answer all our questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
welcome.
much for having us.
gentlemen.
We really appreciate it.
All right.
All right. Have a good night.
Yep, you too. So Richard, do you have anything else for us this evening?
I don't. You have Shawshene Tech next week. You want to send questions to them prior, let me know. The
Okay.
only thing I have to report, Mr. Chairman, is we have hired a recording secretary.
Right.
She will start doing, she's going to do all the backlog of meetings where we had no secretary, recording secretary. And she's going to work off a tape. She won't come to your meetings, so she's really the only one that applied. So she's going to do the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee.
Good. That's good news. That way you don't have to do it. No.
Exactly. Exactly. Or you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the committee member reports. Elementary school building. Tom, do you have anything for us? You're muted.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll just give you an update on the completion. We had a meeting last Thursday. We're at 24% complete of the elementary school proper, and we're at approximately 50% complete on the athletic building. Both projects are on schedule, and we approved a change order, number 4, which brought us just over $540,000 in change orders of the contingency budget of the construction manager. That's basically it from the meeting.
Okay. So those change orders, they cut into the contingency?
Not the construction contingency of the entire budget of $95 million. The construction budget is $76 million, and we haven't touched the overall project budget construction contingency. Most of the contingency money is coming out of the contingency of the construction manager's budget.
Okay.
You know, the gross maximum price, the GMP price on the contract with the construction manager.
Okay. Was that it on the school committee? School building committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Anything from the green committee?
Nothing to report. We haven't had a meeting since we last had finance committee meeting.
Okay. Jason, anything on the bylaw committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We had our first meeting last week. We have a good group of people that are looking to make a lot of changes. We'll be reaching out to committees and department heads in the next couple of weeks to talk about their bylaws and any changes that they might want to suggest. And our next meeting is actually going to be on April 8th. Is our next meeting. That's all I have, pending any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Okay. And let's see, we don't have any secretary timesheets or meeting minutes. Next week we have Shawsheen Tech. And then is it the week after, Richard, we do the warrants? Or I don't have the schedule in front of me, but
Yeah, I think it might. I'll have a warrant hopefully finalized this week.
excellent. Anybody have anything else?
Nope.
Otherwise, I look for a
Sure.
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Dave.
Second.
Okay. All right. Roll call vote. Jason,
Aye.
Rich,
Aye.
Susan,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
aye. Dave,
Aye.
chair votes aye. We're adjourned until next week. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ron.
everyone. See you
Have a
Monday.
good day.
Good night, everybody. Be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.